This is my filming location, mate, not yours. Get your own channel, you know, Swan and Potter or something like that.
So as a result of these big divisions, this big disagreement that existed in England between William Laud and Charles I, King of England on one side, and the Houses of Parliament on the other side, a civil war broke out in August 1642. Lots of causes of this that we've gone into. Basically, King Charles was trying to turn the Protestant Church of England into a kind of a new Roman Catholic Church in all but name. The small amount of democracy and human rights that English people have won for themselves in the previous few hundred years, he was trying to strip away, and the House of Parliament and the people they represented just couldn't accept this. So why is this important to Reading? Why did this bring Reading into the story? Well, there were basically two main bases for each side in the war. The king started the war in Nottingham after a pretty inconsequential battle with the forces of Parliament. He moved to his main base, which was Oxford. Oxford, with its dreaming spires, its tradition, its history, its university, and its high-functioning alcoholic police inspectors, was loyal to the king. London, on the other hand, was very loyal to Parliament. Firstly, that's because that's where Parliament was based, in London, and also because of many other reasons. London was a huge trading town, and as we saw in our last video, the traders and merchants of England were very much into the new ideas of the 17th century, the ideas of Protestantism and giving rights to those people that were rich despite not owning any land. At the same time, there was another group of people who also contributed a lot to the support for Parliament in London, and that is the apprentice bands, the apprentice boys. In those days, if you wanted to have a skilled job, there wasn't really a school or a university if you were not very, very wealthy that you could go to. You'd have to become an apprentice, and this kind of exists today as well. If you're a young man, because it was only men that were allowed to do these trades in those days, unfortunately, you would go away and learn with an apprentice. You'd stay with you'd be an apprentice, but you go and stay with a skilled trader like a tailor or a leather worker or a printer or something like that, and you learn his trade by working alongside him. You get paid not very much money. You might be given accommodation and board and maybe a little bit of a pocket money, but you'd be relatively poor. So what you had in London was a huge amount of these apprentice young men, teenagers or in their 20s, who didn't have an awful lot of money, so they couldn't really get married and have kids, because then, as now, that was a very expensive thing to do. So they were young, single, kind of away from home, and with just enough little bit of pocket money to keep themselves going. Now, it's any policeman or community social worker will tell you that's had to deal with football hooligans. They'll assure you that having lots of young men around with no mortgages, wives, girlfriends or children, but with just enough money to drink a lot, tend to get themselves into trouble. And these apprentice bands got themselves into trouble fighting for the Parliament and fighting against the forces of the king. They would get drunk and get involved in riots and things like that, a little bit like some students might do nowadays. And because they didn't have as much to lose as those wealthy merchants in London, they were kind of like the renter mob crowd, I would say, of the parliamentary force in London. So for that reason, London was very much on the side of Parliament, and Oxford was very much on the side of the king. And Reading, where we are now, was slap bang in the middle of Oxford and London. Okay, so if you wanted to defend your position, the king wanted to defend his position in Oxford, he'd have to hold Reading, and that's where Reading comes into the story of the Civil War. And so, with the king looking to secure his position in Oxford and advance his way towards London, he wanted to secure Reading. And one of the main reasons he wanted to do that was because of what we stood on here, Reading Bridge. Now, actually it's called Caversham Bridge here, but it's in Reading. Caversham Bridge, this is the important one the king wanted to secure. So what you see behind me here is the River Thames, and what you see here is the bridge itself. Okay, so behind me, if you go up river there, you eventually get to Oxford, and if you go down river that way, you get to London. And also on this road, if you follow the road that way, you eventually get to London, and if you follow the road that way, you eventually get to Oxford. Now, this is actually a road I've driven myself quite a few times down there to Oxford, mainly because, as you can probably tell from the channel, I'm kind of interested in academia. I didn't go to Oxford for the academia, you understand. It wasn't learning so much, but if, like me, you also want a girlfriend who's interested in academia, it's best to go to Oxford, because Oxford has 2 universities, whereas Reading only has 1. So if you go to Oxford, you basically double your chances of getting a girlfriend who's interested in academia like you are. So yeah, as the king wanted to secure London, he marched on Reading. He reckoned if he could control Reading and control Caversham Bridge, which cost the river here in Reading, he could keep Oxford, his base, safe from the parliamentarian forces, and he could also advance on London to destroy this rebel city. So shortly before arriving here, in November 1642, he wrote a very stern letter to the mayor of Reading and said, "Make Caversham Bridge strong enough that my army and cannons can march over it." The small parliamentarian force that was here ran away because they were much smaller than the king's army, and the king marched into Reading, controlling the town for himself. We'll have to come back to this bridge a little bit later on, because there was also some important fighting that took place on this bridge during the siege. But before we go, I'd just like to show you another little spot that's quite important to me. Just this little spot here where that kind of blue boat is here. Reading Festival is just kind of over in that direction on the Rivermead estate, just down there. And that little spot down there by the blue boat, me and my friend Tom were once having a few beers there before Reading Festival started, and I said something that he didn't agree with. He slapped me around the back of the head, and my glasses fell off my head and into the river. So if anyone ever finds some slightly weak, short-sighted prescription glasses down there in the murky depths of the River Thames, you know where to return them to. Thanks a lot, Tom. I've just been kind of what's filming here, been disrupted by a swan who seems to think this is his filming location, not mine. He's just getting all antsy, so I'm just going to try and sneak out this way so it doesn't like attack me. This is my filming location, mate, not yours. Get your own channel, you know, Swan and Potter or something like that. Yeah? Jesus. So, if you watched the first video on this English Revolution Civil War series, you'll know that the king wasn't really that popular with the merchants of England, especially the ones of London, and not really ones of Reading either. And when his forces came into the town, they proceeded to make themselves even more unpopular with the merchants and people of Reading. Reading Football Club is called the Royals, and I often think the town should really change the club's name back to the Biscuit Men, or maybe the Biscuiteers or something like that, and back from the Royals, because the treatment of the town of Reading during the siege, or rather, and in the run-up to the siege as well, was really pretty poor from the royalist forces. But in those days, that was just normal for armies. You kind of just took what you wanted from the local area, and you didn't care. In fact, it was the parliamentarian army who changed that policy, and that's part of the reason they won the war. The king's army, basically, the king went back to Oxford shortly after stationing part of his army here. He stationed 3,000 men here, and immediately demanded that the tailors of Reading, free of charge, basically, make him 1,000 suits of uniform for his soldiers. When he went back to Oxford, the pillaging didn't really stop there. Sir Arthur Aston, Irish viewers of the channel might know his name. He's quite famous for other reasons we'll get into later on. Sir Arthur Aston was left in control of the royalist forces here, and he demanded twice £2,000 worth of loan from the tradespeople and the people of Reading, a loan that would never be repaid, and an awful lot of money was borrowed or just stolen really from the people of Reading and never repaid by the king. Not only that, but the main trade of the town, wool and cloth, merchants at the time, they all had to stop their business because as there was going to be a siege, no one was allowed in or out of the town, so they all lost their business, and basically everyone in Reading had to basically take out loans on any property they owned and things like that. The free school that William Lord attended, that was turned into a magazine where all the ammunition was kept. The town soldiers were billeted all over the town, so 3,000 soldiers in a town of about 5,000 people. You know, they didn't really get on too well, the local townspeople in the Royalist army. There was talks of robberies of soldiers, of the people in the town. Houses were burnt down and torn down and things like that by the Royalist army. And actually what was stood on here, this large hill within the Forbury Gardens, Forbury Park here, was built to try and put the Royalist cannon on so they could fire at the parliamentary forces outside the town when the siege started. But in order to get that line of fire correct, they also pulled down other people's houses so they could shoot out there. So houses destroyed, people robbed, drunken soldiers roaming around the town, money borrowed in huge sums off the town and never paid back. Yeah, that was basically the experience of the people in Reading of this Royalist army as it camped out here. So yeah, not very nice. Just thought I'd update you guys. For any of you that were concerned about what happened with the Swan on Caversham Bridge, turns out he wasn't trying to attack me. He'd been shooed there by two other members of the public because they were trying to get him off the busy road to stop get him run over by cars and vans and lorries and stuff, which I guess is good. That they tried to help out the Swan that way. One of the people was a man, one of the person was a woman, and the Swan couldn't get back into the river, so the woman very bravely picked up the Swan and kind of threw him off the bridge into the river. He did fly down, he was okay. So yeah, I thought the Swan was attacking me. Turns out he's probably just as scared of me as I was. So, you know, there we go. The Swan was fine, it was all right. Well done that woman for putting him back in the river. One of my good friends, the famous actor George Clooney, lives there. So I've contacted him last week, and he's just going to be doing a little bit of a part in today's video.